Welcome. Welcome to my dungeon.
Welcome to Kuldrin's Krypt. I'm your host, Master Kuldrin. If you're new to the show, this is a place to dispel myths, get rid of stereotypes, and answer your questions about BDSM. You can call in at 865-268-4005 to leave your questions or visit the Krypt at kuldrinskrypt.com. On this episode of the Krypt, we're going to revisit consensual non-consent. Before we begin, I have to say hello to my amazing co-host, Funsize. Good morning.
Good morning, Master Kuldrin.
And how are you today?
Oh, I'm sunny as a peach. How are you?
As a peach. Well, you know I grew up in Georgia, so...
Wonderful.
I do like peaches, but I am having difficulty in getting up, but I'm definitely looking forward to talking about consensual non-consent and revisiting this and kind of correcting the misinformation that I put there in episode 8. But before we do that, let me go ahead and get a couple of things out of the way. First, I'd like to thank our Patreon supporter, The Accidental Trucker. He's been around since the beginning of the show. He gives $1 a month, and you could too. If you get anything out of this, just go to kuldrinskrypt.com, click on the Support Us tab. You'll find the Patreon link there. You can give anywhere from $1 to $25 a month, and right now we have a goal of $30 a month through Patreon to help pay for the show. Things have become increasingly expensive, and we need your help in reducing those costs. So we will continue doing one episode a week through September, but after that, if we haven't hit our goal, then we're going to have to drop it down to one episode every other week. Second, I would like to thank our sponsor, BDSMcontracts.org. Use the coupon code Kuldrin20, that is KULDRIN20, for a 20% discount on all purchases. They've got some really beautiful 25-page contracts to help you get started in your MS or DS relationships for your contract needs there. And finally, those rules to love by. Rule number 1, safe, sane, consensual, and informed. Rule number 2, kinky. KNKI from the KNKI app, available on all platforms. That stands for knowledge, no intolerance, kindness, and integrity. And finally, number 3, that quote from Paul Young. Submission is not about authority, and it's not about obedience. It is all about relationships of love and respect. Now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get into some definitions. You and I have talked about this, of course, before we hit record, and I think that you're absolutely right. You cannot talk about CNC without getting into what SSC, rack, and prick are. So go ahead and throw those definitions out there. Of course, safe, sane, and consensual. We've said that in the rules to love by, but I think you've probably got a little bit more to address with it as well. So why don't you take the lead on that?
Well, SSC, or safe, sane, and consensual, though here we add informed, of course, is a checklist of sorts for anything you're going to do within the lifestyle. You want to ask yourself, is it safe physically, mentally, and emotionally? Is it something that you find to be sane? And finally, do you and the other participants knowingly consent to doing it? And that's just very basic things. Almost everyone in the lifestyle uses it to some extent. And then we have RAC, which is risk-aware consensual kink. This means that all parties know that there are risks involved. They know what the risks are, and they're still fully consenting to participating in that variety of kink. And finally, prick, which is one of the newer ones, is personal responsibility informed consensual kink. And it's the idea that each individual party should seek out the knowledge and assume personal responsibility for the activities or kink they are consenting to. And that's all very basic safety things, but it's all very serious things when you're taking a look at CNC.
Yeah, and you know, here, even in the rules to love by, I talk about the SSC, and as you said, I add the I to it. But personally, because of my experience level and the people that I play with, I lean more toward rack than I do toward SSC. I do believe that through conversation, communication, and education, that we can become very aware of the risks and then consent to those risks, because people have heard me talk about how I will participate in, say, breath play. Now, that's not something that is considered safe by most people, but as I've said in the past, there are certain ways that you can do it that really reduce the risk involved. But for the newer people, I think it's important to stick to the safe and sane. The only problem that I have with that is that is up for interpretation. What may be considered safe and sane for me to another person may not, or just the opposite. So there again, that's where so much education and understanding must come into play. Do you have any feelings on the 3 different acronyms there?
I honestly use a mixture between SSC and RAC myself because, like you, I do engage in what many consider to be risky activities, and there are, of course, risks. But at the same time, I do like to evaluate if something's sane to me personally, and that's where, for me, SSC comes intermixed. For me, yes, there are risks to breath play, but yes, it is sane to me because I understand the risk and I have followed as many safety guidelines as I could. For others, the idea of participating in an activity that has those risks, with the very nature of breath play being that you can literally kill someone because they might have a heart attack during it, is insane. Like you, it is open to interpretation and it is my choice for me personally.
Okay. It is interesting because I know someone here locally that is very passionate about preaching against SSC because it just leaves too much to interpretation. So go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think it has to be the person in the lifestyle's choice which one to follow, but they should follow at least one of these.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so let's go ahead and move on and continue with these definitions. And I want to take this because this is correcting my mistake. When I did episode number 8, which was really a cautionary tale of CNC, but I was using the more modern translation of it for the newer generation of kinksters. So let me go ahead and define what the basis of CNC is in this first definition. And that is simply full TPE. TPE is total power exchange. I think we've mentioned that before. But full TPE CNC, in which a slave or a sub or a bottom has given full permission to their master, mistress, dom, top, to essentially remove all boundaries and all possible limits, fully trusting their care and consent in their top. And that is, like I said, the original definition of what CNC really is, the essence of it. You give up total control. Now, that can be, as I mentioned during the the effective communication episode, someone who becomes property at that point, but not necessarily. There are other ways that is also managed. So don't necessarily just think that if you do that, then you're property. You're just completely entrusting. When done correctly in a very long-term relationship, this is something that can be a beautiful and amazing level of trust. In a newer relationship, it can be also something that is fun and scary and a lot of different things, dangerous, and in some cases I would consider it just stupid, but not necessarily always. The second definition, which is what I talked about in, again, episode number 8, which was vetting and CNC. This is things known as rape play, or the consent given for a role play or non-consensual act to be carried out within a scene. So you're just saying, you know what, we're going to role play these things and I'm going to fight back or whatever. But in essence, I really do consent to it. I'm just going to act like I don't. There's a big difference between the two definitions, and both can be a whole lot of fun. Both can be very trusting and loving, because even though it's something that you may consent to and then fight with or do the role play, there's a lot of psychological and emotional things that can take place during that event too that can make it either exciting and positive or devastating and emotionally destructive. So it is something, either way you go, it's something to be careful with. So like I said, I just needed to correct what I had put out there before by going a little bit deeper into those definitions. What do you have to say on this?
I think that we need to get into each of those separately and go a little bit more in depth than just those very basic definitions. To go back to the CNC, when we're talking about its original definition in MS or DS dynamics, it really creates a carte blanche within that dynamic as far as any limits or rules. And what that means is that the bottom has such a level of trust and respect in their top that they're saying, here, you have all of my willful consent to do anything that you find appropriate at this point. And then they don't have negotiations usually. They don't go, hey, is it okay to push this soft limit or that soft limit? The top or dominant in that situation decides over time when it's appropriate to do those things, what is appropriate to carry out. It can be very beautiful, but like you said, there are risks involved. Do you want to talk about some of those risks?
Yeah, sure. I'll hit the risks, and I have a really good example of this as well. But before I hit that, some of the risks involved is that without limits and boundaries, you truly have to rely on your partner to be able to fully understand your needs, even when they sometimes push you beyond the limits which you had once considered a hard limit. Now, I know someone who decided to go CNC with a DS relationship, looking toward that transforming into an MS relationship, and her mistress went way too far with things and turned her into a human ashtray. She didn't even smoke, but just thought that it would be fun to have her kneel on all fours, and she used her as an ashtray. So she now has a bunch of little dot scars on her back where cigarettes have been put out on her. And she had agreed to the CNC, and she maintained it for a period of time. But as the acts become more monstrous, she finally got her wits about her and said, and ended the relationship. And it was a very fast moving, high intensity relationship that, in my opinion and hers, now that it's over, went way too far, way too fast. And if she would have maintained the relationship longer before agreeing to CNC, then she would have found that this person was actually not somebody that she could trust to care for her, to lead her, guide her, and nurture her in the ways that a true DS or MS relationship should be. No word of caution, I guess. And like you were saying, that's why it's so important for people to really get to know each other and spend that time developing that trust. What else do you have on risks?
As far as risks go, I think it's important to spend the time, like we've discussed, building trust, open communication, and care in the partnership. And that goes both ways. It's not just one way, of course, because none of these relationships are. It's also important to understand that just because you have a top or just because you have a dominant or a master does not mean that as a bottom or a slave, etc., that you need to try to form this relationship. I feel like there are a lot of people, especially new people out there, that want to say that they have no limits and want to enter into these relationships because it's so exciting in theory. But realistically, that takes a lot of work from both people all the time. And it is just mind-boggling once you get into what it actually is to try to jump into that straight out of the gate. I definitely don't recommend it when you're starting out.
Yeah, it sounds fun and adventurous. And one thing that I want to bring up is people that say that they have no limits. There's always limits. Very few people in the world truly have no limits whatsoever. And those people need professional psychological help. And the reason that I say that is because if you're listening to this and you're thinking that you don't have any limits, then let's do a snuff film. Let's find somebody who is into amputation. Or as I put it to one of my, somebody that I once knew, let me brand daddy's little across your forehead. Are you okay with that? Are you going to go into work the next day with this big brand across your forehead? Everybody has limits. And even people that I've met whose limits are way on the other side of what I consider safe or sane, they still have them. And I think it's either just out of excitement, that whole sub frenzy or dom frenzy, or out of arrogance that people say that they don't have any limits. They want to impress people and this is not something that I don't need to be impressed. I need the truth. I need honesty and openness. And if you can't give that to me, then right off the bat, I'm going to push you really hard just in questioning, not in physical acts or psychological terrorism or anything like that. I'm just going to push you to find out through conversation to get you to admit to some limit. Master Arcane in his interview brought this up as well. And he said that he asked somebody, what about basically having relations with an animal, and something with somebody that said that they had no limits. And, that's true. I mean, that's a good one to pull on somebody. Oh, really? Well, what about the Tijuana Donkey Show? Let's fly down to Tijuana and we can get you hooked up in one of these clubs that do that. Cause I just love to watch that. Yeah. And no, I would not really, I would not watch that, as people who have listened before know. I have a big rule. It's as long as it doesn't involve children or animals and everyone involved consents, then that's the only time that I play. But just in that example, I'm sure a lot of people listening are going, oh God, and they may have just been to a munch or something and talking to somebody and say, oh, I've got no limits. Well, one person out of 900 million may truly not have a limit, and those people have a death wish. So, it's not impressive. It actually comes across as something that is very arrogant and foolish when somebody says that to me, whether it's somebody brand new or somebody that's been around for 40 years, it doesn't matter. Now, I have known a lot of people that have been around for 40 years, and I've never heard one of them say that they don't have any limits. So it is more prone to the newer people. I remember I said it when I was 18 and just getting started. I don't have any limits. And I got smacked down verbally for saying that. Oh, really? Okay. Well, let's talk about that. And I'm like, oh God, I got no limits. Oh crap, I do have limits. It's just excitement, and it's not always arrogance, but it does sound foolish. I must be honest there. It does sound foolish.
I would actually like to throw out a suggestion now that we're discussing this a little bit for the newer people who are thinking, oh, I don't have limits because I don't know what they are. Instead of telling someone in the lifestyle that you have no limit because you're excited and you want to try everything, perhaps, just my suggestion, you tell the person you're talking to that you would like to find out what your limits truly are.
Oh, yeah. And that's sexy when you do that, too, by the way. You can also visit kuldrinscrypt.com and click on the contact resources page and find the limits and interest survey. And there's several things on there that people might not know exactly what they are, so they can hit Google and find out. But things like gates of hell, figging, as you brought up from your former submissive, not knowing what that was. There's quite a few things on there. Sounding, some people don't know what that is, but they can look these things up. I know sounding and gates of hell, because I'm not into CBT, is definitely hard limits for me. That's just not going to happen. So, and I'm not going to watch it either. And I'm not going to perform that on somebody. So yeah, that's a very good resource. You can kind of go through that, and it's very understandable not to know what they are. I mean, 22 years I've been doing this, and a few weeks ago during a scene, I actually found out one of my personal limits, in pushing someone to an extreme level as they wanted, and it was still within the bounds of what is safe and sane, but it was still a very hard push because of their own personal limits, and they wanted to play with this. They wanted to see where it was going to go, and I found out that approaching that limit with them was actually a hard limit of mine, simply because, and this may sound weird to people, but I didn't like the sounds that they were making. I'm serious. Okay, everybody knows I'm a sadist, and breaking into a hysterical laughter, even though that's something that does take place coming from her actually pushed a button in me that made me want to push her beyond her limits to the point where, okay, you want to laugh about something while I'm flogging you or whatever the case was, whatever implement that I was using when she broke into this. And it just really made me mad. And I backed off. I didn't end the scene, but I backed off because I didn't want to hear her laugh, especially not the way that she was laughing. It just bothered me. So it's like, you know what? No, I can't do this. Hard limit. It sounds stupid, and thinking about it now, yeah, it was stupid, but still, in the moment, that became a hard limit, and I had to back off from what I was doing because I was about to be pushed past what I would consider safe or sane in the moment. Things that come up, things that we find, I know Funsize, 12 years you've been around. I'm sure that you have had some moments that looking back on it, you're like, oh God, that was just stupid. But, you know, I love thinking about those things just out of the comical standpoint, and, you know, laughter is healthy, but it's also learning experiences, especially it seems like the dumber it is, the more you can learn from it.
Yes. Definitely a yes on that one.
So I think I've beat this dead horse long enough. Let's move on into CNC, as in rape and abduction play, these type of things. Why do you think that appeals to some people? I mean, you know that abduction play is one of my favorite role plays. So why do you think that appeals to me?
I've actually got to chime in that it's not just you. People actually have questioned me about this before because it is an activity which I engage in. And I always prefer to be the bottom in these situations. So I would say that it appeals in the sense of fear. And fear comes into play in various role plays, knife play, abduction, this version of CNC. And of course, there are others. But for this, it has the sense of making one truly helpless. And there's also a certain taboo element to it. So for me, I think that would be the appeal. And I think the same is true for a lot of our listeners out there and a lot of others.
I think for me, as the top in a scene like that, it's truly the power of it. And it's different. Like you said, it's taboo. It can be quite fun if it's done correctly for all parties. And I've given this caution before, it is nothing for newer people to play with, in my opinion.
I definitely have to agree with that. When I was first starting out, I could not have handled the mental and emotional side of this particular role play.
Yeah.
But as you said, it can be incredibly beautiful and wonderfully intense. Some of my most intense scenes have been this version of role play. And I think it's important to understand how you're going to approach this topic and carry out a scene of this nature. And to do that, you really have to keep open, honest communication. And during check-ins and negotiations, go slow with it. If you're the top, don't go, hey, I want to do a rape role play with you. A lot of times it'll get in someone's head as, I want to rape you. And that's never okay.
Yeah.
So you just have to be very cautious, and I think it helps to bring it up as a fantasy of, well, I have this fantasy where I'm running through the park and you, this stranger, in theory, for this role play, snatch me up and drag me behind some trees and pull my clothes off. And then that's presented as a fantasy, and it gets that fear and it gets the taboo and the adrenaline going. But at the same time, it is a fantasy. It is about how much you trust that person and trust yourself in those situations.
You know, and I've got to share this. This is hilarious. Be very careful in how you do these scenes. I know you just said running through the park, grab you, take you behind a tree. Myself and a former slave had set up an abduction scene, and she was jogging down a road, and I pulled over to talk to her and ended up kind of jumping out, chasing her a little bit. Of course, had a folded up handkerchief to throw around her face and zip tie her and throw her in the trunk and take her back to the house. And in her house in the basement was a very nice dungeon set up. Well, she's jogging down the road. I pull over, talk to her. Of course, she acts like, leave me alone, following right into the role play. I get out, start chasing her, snatch her up, zip tie her, start carrying her into the trunk of the car, and that's where the police showed up. There was a little old lady that saw me chasing her and basically tackling her to the ground and called 911. Yeah. That was an awkward conversation that you don't want to have with police. They were not happy to get that call. So, other people did not consent to our kinky play. They were not informed about our kinky play. So they thought that I was actually attacking this woman. And you've got to be careful. Now, that actually added a whole lot of taboo and fun to it when the sirens and the flashing lights first came up, but that lasted less than a second, I gotta be honest, and then it went to sheer freaking panic. Thank God we didn't go to the extreme of actually using something that would have knocked her out, which was talked about and is incredibly stupid to do, which is why I refused to do it. She wanted to. So be very cautious in that.
So other than the risk you just mentioned, in which for you turned out very humorously, for others it might not, there's also mental and emotional damage that can come up as a risk. It is very jarring in those scenes because you are truly riding that line of edge play in which the fear can take over and it'll block out everything else. And as a bottom who's participated in these, I participated several times in this version of roleplay with the man who was my master for 3.5 years. And we did it several times, and I've got to say, I think there was only maybe twice that fear did not eat away at my head out of maybe 20 times over that length of time together. So there are some mental and emotional heavy risk involved as far as that goes.
Hey, I want to jump in here and also say on the flip side of that you don't have to be mentally or emotionally damaged to want to participate in these types of things. It is a very, very common fantasy to want to do this for both men and women. And that does not necessarily mean that you are damaged or broken. Now, sure, there are some who have been through certain experiences that have these fantasies, and to fulfill them may be very unhealthy. That is something that you really need to think about, really need to consider, and absolutely positively be open with your partner about that if you've ever been through something like that. I know someone who didn't experience it himself, but had a family member that was raped, and he did not tell his partner about that, and she wanted to have a scene, and it really, really messed him up because he was not open and honest about it. And I mean, to the point where he actually had to go for inpatient treatment. So it's something that on both sides of it, you have to be open and honest about it. But just because you have these fantasies, that doesn't mean that you're mentally or emotionally damaged. But a lot of mental and emotional damage can come out of these scenes if they're not done the right way, if there's not enough conversation about them, if the trust level is not there. And I just give warning that I would not recommend newer people, especially playing with other newer people, to get involved in this. Now, I had a question come from a listener that they've been married for 15 years and they're getting into kink now and wanted to know my opinion about some of the types of play that they were getting into. And they've already got a very established relationship, but I still said, you know what, you've got this established relationship, but this is a very new aspect of it. So there still needs to be a lot of communication, and you each might find out things about the other person that you didn't know, even though you've been together so long. But go ahead and dive into it and go from there. Keep me posted. And they decided, they put it off. I think it was about 3 months that they put it off, and then they ended up having this type of scene and really enjoyed it. I mean, it worked out well for them. God bless them. It was great for them, but they were very thankful that they waited for, like I said, 2 or 3 months, 4 months, however long it was, and had a lot more conversation about it. How do you decide if either version of CNC is right for you?
I think it's important that you really meditate and really think about it, whichever version you're wanting to do, because you need to be sure with either one, no matter what position you're taking for it is. You need to be sure that it's something that you want and something that you feel you can handle. Be aware of the risk involved in both parts of this. Talk to your partner, and if they feel it's not the right path for your relationship, be respectful. You have to understand that, as we've brought up in previous shows, your kink is okay, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that kink is for everyone else, and that includes your partner. So you have to respect that. And then be mindful of check-ins and aftercare, especially for CNC rape play. There is nothing more essential than the aftercare, and this is definitely coming from personal experience. Without that aftercare, it really can turn the situation from a loving, respectful fulfillment of fantasy and great desire into something damaging and horrible. So I think those are the very important things as far as looking at either version of CNC.
Yeah, Funsize, I couldn't have said that better myself. Those are 4 very, very important points that you brought up with that decision. And it is a decision not to be made lightly. Like you said, a lot of meditation on it, or as some would say down here in the South, percolate on it for a while. Really consider it and think about it. Any final thoughts?
I think we have this episode wrapped up pretty well. Do you want to go ahead and tell what our next week's agenda is going to be?
Next week on the Krypt, Funsize, to be honest, I'm not exactly sure which episode I'm going to be pushing out, so it'll be a surprise for everyone involved, including myself at this point. But in the meantime, go to CuldrinsCrypt.com for show notes, how to subscribe information, and the link to the Facebook group so you can take part in the conversation and be eligible for giveaways. Also, I've just established a group on FetLife, so search Kuldrin's Krypt at FetLife and join our community there. We've already got several listeners involved, and some of my local community has jumped in there as well. But while you're there at CuldrinsCrypt.com, click on the Support Us tab to become a Patreon supporter. Like I said, we do have that goal of $30 a month, or unfortunately, we're going to have to take the show down to 2 episodes a month. Also, all of our contact information is there. If you want to email me, it is sir@CuldrinsCrypt.com. And Funsize?
You can reach me at funsize@kuldrinscrypt.com.
All right. That's going to wrap it up. This has been Master Kuldrin and Funsize for KuldrinsCrypt.com. Unearth the truth.